Hi, my name is Clare Thorn, Extension Associate with Central State University Extension. My role is within our Agriculture and Natural Resource Program area, and my presentation today is to provide some information about starting seeds indoors. Throughout my presentation, I hope to share how you can start gardening with little or no experience. There is no reason to become overwhelmed with the information because I always recommend to start small. The best gardening experience comes by experimenting each growing season. Gardening offers many values, from growing your own food to saving money with your food budget, therapy to help relieve daily stresses, and also getting necessary vitamin D that your body greatly needs. No matter what style of gardening works for you, whether it's traditional in-ground, raised beds or containers, we will discuss cool and warm weather crops, whether to start seeds indoors, or if you should direct sow your seeds based on the crops you're wanting to grow. So why don't we get started? So why start seeds indoors? There are several reasons, from getting over the winter blahs, feeling satisfaction from seeing something grow from a small seed until you place it on your plate. You can find a variety of seeds where there may be a limited number of plants available for purchase. Seeds are rather inexpensive to the cost of a plant, considering the seed packet costs a couple of dollars for a dozen or more seeds, compared to one plant that may cost more than that. Some regions with shorter growing seasons, you can get ahead of the growing season. Hard to find varieties, choice of heirloom veggies, organic options are just a few of the other reasons to start your own seeds. You can even practice seed saving and participate with seed swap events. One of the most important factors to keep in mind is with gardening as a hobby, you won't necessarily break the bank. To get started, you only need to start out with basic equipment such as hand cultivators, a hoe, and a rake. You can add tools as you continue with your gardening. Really, your equipment depends on the style of garden you choose. You can be creative with your seed starting supplies using newspaper or recycled containers, which is an option I generally use if I do not purchase plants. The following slide will show some equipment to help you get started. These supplies are just a few you can choose to use. The most important is to use seed starting or germination soil, which is lightweight and fluffy, to allow your seedlings to sprout with ease and develop a good root system. Heat mats are nice to help warm the soil, but you can locate to other warm spots like the top of your refrigerator. The other good option to consider is the lighting to provide broad spectrum UV coverage. As you develop your skills of starting seeds, you can always increase your supplies. Here are a few gardening companies that specialize in gardening supplies and horticultural equipment. You may visit a local garden center and greenhouse, as well as your local hardware and big box stores to pick up your supplies. Let's look at what vegetables you may decide to grow in your garden and start from seeds. As you can see from this list, you have a variety to choose from, and of course not all are listed. But here you can see spinach, lettuce, tomatoes, eggplant, and of course there's something fun to grow. Things to consider are whether the veggies are cool season or warm season crops, whether you are experimenting with a new crop or variety. It's completely up to you. Success is measured by a nice harvest or simply learning from the experience. So the big question really is, when do I start seeds? You have to decide if you're wanting to start cool season crops or warm season crops. The difference between the two is that cool season crops can tolerate the up and down temperatures of spring, and you can get them out to your garden space starting as early as March, depending on the crop. Warm season crops, you must wait until the soil has warmed enough so as not to slow the growth process. In either case, starting seeds indoors will be a minimum of 6 to 12 weeks prior to the last frost, or when you ideally want to transfer them to the garden. This information is found on the seed packet. In the next few slides, we will discuss how to plan a calendar based on the last frost date. With a planting calendar, you can estimate the time to start your seeds. Knowing the difference between last freeze or frost dates is rather important to understand. Each region has a specific average date that it should be safe to plant outside. In one of the upcoming slides, the Farmer's Almanac determines this date based on the NOAA recorded history. And in this case, April 23rd is what has been indicated for the Xenia-Wilberforce area. While that could be, it is well known in the Miami Valley region, it's around May 15th. Another common date is to plant near Mother's Day. However, from year to year, freezes have happened after that date. So in my experience and due to my time availability, I usually plant Memorial Weekend and into June. This information is for planting warm weather crops like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, beans, squash, and cucumbers. Now this isn't to say you can't start plants early. You can, but you must be aware of the weather and provide protection for your tender veggies and annuals. Most important, the soil must be warm for these crops. Otherwise, they just sit and it takes some time for them to recover. So with a calendar in hand or using your phone to determine the last frost date and reading the seeding packet, count back on the calendar the number of weeks from the frost date. If you do an internet search to find the last frost date for your area, you should come across the Farmer's Almanac as well as additional sites offering this information. Some will dispute the Farmer's Almanac is unreliable. However, they have been recording weather trends and gardening information for years. Whether you choose to plant traditionally or by the moon, that is entirely at your discretion. This form of gardening information can serve as a guide, and for that reason alone is why I refer to their site. So here you see there are about 172 growing days in the Xenia-Wilberforce area on average. That is from the last spring frost to the first fall frost. It's a given, however, that for the Miami Valley region, the last frost date is around May 15th. So many people keep in mind Mother's Day. However, even those dates are not guaranteed as freezes has happened past that date. So let's get started learning how to sow seeds. You'll want to start with clean growing containers, whether they are cell packs, peat pots, or repurposed recyclable containers that you have created drainage holes. Next, you'll want to have seed starting germination soil to fill your containers. Reason for the specific soil is that it will allow for better germination and growth of the seedling, root development, water, and nutrient absorption. Fill your containers with the soil with a small amount of space at the top. You can give a nice couple taps to help the soil settle, but do not press or pack the soil. Next, get one of your seed packets and read the directions as how deep to plant the seed. Some seeds can be gently sprinkled on the top and then pressed into the soil, while others may need to be a little deeper. You can use a pencil tip to create a depression and drop the seed into it and then cover with soil. I suggest 3 seeds to an individual cell. Next, you'll want to moisten the soil but not saturate it. I've heard that using a meat baster delivers a nice amount of water. Finally, place a clear sheet of plastic over the top to help conserve moisture. Once germination has begun, that plastic can be removed. Place in a warm spot with good lighting for warming the soil and providing light to activate the growing process. If all seeds germinate, you will need to thin the seedlings. Use scissors to snip it, or you can gently remove by hand, carefully, as not to disturb the soil for the other seedlings. If you need to transplant the seedlings into larger containers, do so with care. A few other things to keep in mind is the temperature to stimulate the growth. Now that you understand the planting process, let's talk about seeds. Which do you start early indoors, or which do better by direct sowing into your garden space, whether in ground, raised beds, or containers? The link provided in this slide provides planting dates for your zip code to create your planting calendar. Use it as a guide and give it a try. I created the next several slides for a quick reference. The crops are listed alphabetical, so as we go through the next several slides, you'll see which seeds you can start indoors, when to transplant to the garden, or direct sow into your garden space. As we look at this slide, one of the first crops to start indoors would be broccoli or Brussels sprouts. Your beans and beets, rather than start indoors, the better option is to direct sow with the dates indicated. I have seen garden centers sell beans and beets started as seedlings, so in this case you could use them as transplants to your gardens. The main concern is root disturbance and how well they handle the stress of the transplant. Here you see crops to start indoors or transplants. It includes cabbage, cantaloupe, cauliflower, celery, collards, and cucumbers. Direct sow crops would be carrots and corn on the dates listed. This list, start by seed or transplant, includes eggplant, kale, kohlrabi, leeks, and lettuce. Okra you can direct sow, although you might find seedlings at a garden center. On this slide, you see that seeds that may be started indoors or transplanted would be peppers and pumpkin. Direct sow would include onions, parsnips, peas, potatoes, radishes, and spinach. The following crops to start seeds or transplants would include squash, sweet potatoes, Swiss chard, tomatoes, and watermelon. Turnips would be seeds to direct sow into your garden space. Overall, keep in mind that each crop you select may have its own preferences. You'll need to learn what works best with repeated practice and growing from season to season. Earlier I mentioned about 3 seeds in the individual cells, and if all seeds should germinate, you would thin out the seedlings by snipping with scissors or gently pulling one out. When doing so, select the strongest one to keep, removing the weakest. Ideally, for optimal growth, only one seedling should remain. After a few weeks, it's the proper time to thin your seedlings once they've started growing. This picture clearly demonstrates how to snip and remove the seedlings. Once you see the second set of true leaves, you can begin to fertilize. The seedlings may be around 2 inches at this time. So in this case, this is 1, 2, making the first pair of true leaves, and the second set of leaves are just coming on. So you would need to wait a little longer before fertilizing. Continue to let your seedlings grow until their stems thicken up and the appropriate time to transplant them into your garden space. At this point, your seedling may be ready to move to your garden. You want to gently remove the plant from the container to see their root development. Pictured here demonstrates good root growth, and it indicates it is time to go to its final planting spot. 2 things to keep in mind. Some seedlings may need to be transplanted into a slightly larger container before it is time to set outside. And 2, you do not want the seedlings to get root bound, as it creates challenges to grow properly once you do move it to the garden. Your seedlings will need to adjust to the outside climate before you leave them out for good. You'll need to introduce them, rather, harden off your seedlings to prepare them for their move and to be exposed to outside conditions. To do so, 1, withhold fertilizer for about a week that they're last inside, and also about that same time frame before transplanting to the garden, you want to set them out in a protected area for a couple of hours each day, lengthening their time outside over the next week. Keep them in a dappled sun exposure and definitely not in direct wind, as it will dry the soil rapidly. When you're ready to transplant, you should choose overcast or cloudy days so the transplants can adjust to the change slowly. Never plant in the hottest part of the day. Mornings are best. A few other specifics about hardening off. Remember, up to now, the seedlings have had the best growing experience. So you need to slowly expose them to the harsh reality: full sun, winds, rains, and up and down temperatures. An ideal transition would include a cold frame where you can adjust the conditions for your little plants. Some are available for purchase, or if you have a few carpentry skills, you could build one rather inexpensively. It's the big day, moving the seedlings to their summer home. Oh, happy day! While you've been waiting to plant in your garden, hopefully you have had some time to prep the garden space. Your plants will do well in loose, amended soil, which will allow good root development and absorption of nutrients and water. Adding organic materials such as leaves, coffee grounds, eggshells, manure, and compost are a great way to enhance your soil to create a nutrient-rich growing environment. If the consistency is that of granola, basically loose and crumbly, you are off to a great start. Depending on your gardening space, I always recommend starting small, then increase the area slowly to a manageable space. The larger you go, increases your workload. Rather than too much space, think about using your space more efficiently. By this, I am suggesting succession gardening. Plant your early crops, and when they are done producing, replace later crops to keep your garden actively growing all season long. Remember, if you do not have in-ground space, options could be a raised bed, a lasagna bed, containers, or even hanging baskets. Enjoy your gardening experience. I've included a number of nurseries within the Wilberforce Xenia area which you may choose to visit when purchasing seeds, plants, or gardening supplies. Listed here are the resources for my presentation and that you might find helpful. Keep in mind most reliable websites for information and resources are followed by .edu or .gov, providing research and factual information. Other sites with .org or .com generally are trying to sell a product or a service and may present biased information. It is okay, of course, to review such sites for information, but be careful with the referenced materials. Should you have additional questions or would like to reach me, I have provided my contact information here. Central State University is an 1890 land-grant institution. Since we receive our state and federal funding to support reaching our audiences, we have been happy to supply the following statement.